when you're coaching, it's a wonderful environment, I think, to learn a lot about yourself as well and how you react to situations, as a grown up, managing kids and sports and their emotions and the other team's emotions and calls that go your way or the other way and how you're handling it because the kids are looking up to you and you've got to really set a high level, I think, of integrity. If that's the type of coach you want to be, you rotate them all in, not just to go out and massacre teams with your top five and leave the other five standing around. That's demoralizing to those five kids standing there looking at the grass. That's not cool, and I don't do that. And I've seen other coaches do that, and it might make themselves happy. It might make those five parents that are starters happy. But what about those other five? I think about the whole team and what we're trying to do to develop youth athletes and young people. Making money is wonderful, but if that's your starting driver, that's going to be difficult in sports for a lot of people that don't have that head start. And then of course, there's a lot of people that have that head start that get spoiled with it because they've got everything kind of handed to them and they don't really earn it. And there's this kind of imbalance of desire, and then there's sometimes too much padding, I think, too. Youth development, it's not really about the points on the board. It's about all these other things in developing a young athlete into a young person, whether it's a daughter or a son, just being into a good person and playing things right and having fun. For Christ's sakes, they're kids. They got to have some fun.
Like many future professionals, Amar Doman was bitten by the football bug at a very early age. However, his ticket to the big leagues would not end up being as an athlete, but rather as an owner. Hey there, I'm Scott Rintoul, the host of Better Sports Parents. And if you're watching or listening to this, you probably know the goal of this program is quite simple: to help you, me, and everyone else out there become a better sports parent through a series of conversations with world-class performers from across sport. And through their perspective, insight, and experience, we hope to allow you to better influence the youth sports environment so that every child can enjoy a positive youth sports experience. Well, Amar Doman played a number of sports as a kid, but he didn't excel at any to the extent that he would go on to become a professional athlete. Instead, at the age of 18, he decided to pursue entrepreneurship and became extremely successful in building businesses over the course of his professional career, one that led him back to the Canadian Football League. In 2021, Amar Doman purchased the BC Lions and has been owner of the team ever since. Amar is very passionate about the game. He is an owner who is very invested in the community, but he is also a father of three. He is a proud husband, and he is someone who has given his time, his talent, and his treasure to the youth sports environment. He's learned a lot watching his children in sport and in coaching his children in sport, and he's here to share it with you right here on Better Sports Parents. Amar, thank you very much for doing this and spending time with me here on Better Sports Parents.
Thanks so much for having me, Scott. Great to be with you.
Absolutely, and it's wonderful to have you here. Was this something you dreamed about since you were a little boy, growing up and being the owner of a professional team?
Not when I was little, but I think, as I got a little bit older and I got towards high school, those kind of things come into your mind, but you don't really, know if they're going to happen or not. But I think everything starts with a dream and a belief.
So did you at one point pinch yourself that you were the owner of the BC Lions, or is that still something that happens every single day right now?
Every single day. It's so exciting. And I'll tell you what, it really does make everything make sense when you can really, not only to own a sports team obviously sounds cool and all that, but to be involved truly with it, not be a hands-off owner, but a hands-on owner, really trying to help the community and all the things we're going to talk about, spending time with you today. It really has been pinch me all the way through.
Well, you are certainly a hands-on owner. Anybody who's followed this team or knows anything about your involvement in the community would certainly know that. Where did the youth sports dream start? What did you play when you were a young lad?
Sure, sure. So over in Victoria, played some rugby, played basketball. We played football a lot though, but we didn't have a league to play in where I was in Victoria, in the Oak Bay area, but we played as friends and we'd have footballs at recess and all that. And so it was just, we designed plays and and then back in someone's house, we'd throw, balls through trees to try and make things fun, and just we loved the game and the sport. So, we just loved all sports, but certainly football for me was just something I also loved to watch. And watching the BC Lions grow up and watching the NFL, it's exciting. There's so much strategy in there that it definitely, it caught me.
So if you weren't dreaming of being an owner, who was the player that was the poster on your wall or you visualized yourself at a young age?
Well, there's so many, that come to mind. I think when I think of the BC Lions, I always think of Louis Pasaglia, of course, the kicker, who was just iconic, and then, of course, there's so many quarterbacks and offensive guys that the list goes on, G. Roy, I mean, there's so many great names that have come through BC, and, of course, the NFL, sadly, I'm a Dallas fan there, so I've got a lot of, hurt going on for 32 years without a Super Bowl there on that side, but that's okay. We're loyal people.
Well, you grew up in the heyday, so you got to witness those 3 and 4 years. So you were okay for a little while there. It sounds like you sampled a lot of different sports as a kid. Was there one that stood out, or were you always a multi-sport athlete growing up?
Yeah, multi-sports, doing a bunch of different things. Tennis was another one as well, of all things, and I still play tennis. So, I just like to be competitive. I worked a lot when I was young as well. Our family obviously had a lot of businesses in forestry and sawmilling, so I was working in that. So there really wasn't a lot of free time. It was sports, it was work. I think today it's the same thing now with the family, and I don't think I like free time anyways. I like to fill it up.
What was your parents' approach to youth sports? Were they very involved? Were they hands off? How did that relationship work?
They were more hands off. My mom, she's an immigrant at a young age, and she came over in her late teens. And my dad, being born on the island, he played sports. He played a lot of soccer, and growing up in Duncan, and so there was some there, but it wasn't, I wouldn't say we're a big sports family, but certainly there was a passion to keep ourselves busy, work hard at it.
You were in a smaller community and obviously in Victoria, which is a larger community in BC as well, but it does have a small town feel. How much was the community aspect of sports important to you and your family?
Very important, and also attending games and also cheering on other sports teams that we knew that had friends there. We were always kind of in the mix, and also financially helping out as well. So certainly doing all those things, amongst delivering papers in the small town of Victoria, we did all that stuff as well. And back in the days when people read a newspaper, I think, but certainly those times have changed, Scott. But really, involved from that standpoint as well, and a lot of friends that were in sports and went deeper than I did. Still in communication with those guys.
So, did you continue to be active beyond your youth sports experience in sports, or did it end for you at some point completely?
It ended in school, and then tennis continued on, just, more socially, but obviously working out. I do some boxing, CrossFit, all that kind of stuff now. So trying to stay in good shape, because I think those work, that ethic of work when you play sports or work, really stick with you for the rest of your life. I think it's very important.
I'm a big believer in that as well. Is that something your parents reinforced when you were in the sporting environment?
Yeah, they did, and, basically stuff like getting there on time, listening to the coach, all those things that, me coaching today that, I'm trying to emulate those things I heard growing up as well, and also being a coach is it's a unique and tough situation, especially when you're coaching your own kid, which can be interesting because I think everyone looks at their own child differently, even though you say you don't, but you do. But it's a lot of fun, and I think a lot of this stuff has come full circle for me.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. You've been involved as a coach for a number of years now. How many of your children out of the 3 have you coached?
I've coached one for 3 years and, coming on 4 now, and he's our eldest, and, our youngest one I've done a little bit of side coaching with, and our daughter, in the middle, I have not coached, but, she's into volleyball and other sports that I'm not, I don't have the skill set, I think, to, coach those sports.
So for your own kids, I know that they may be different answers, but what sports do they play?
All the kids, first of all, play tennis. They had to learn some piano. Let's start with that stuff. So there was that going on. And then there's football for the boys, both flag and tackle. Rugby for the boys. They're still playing that. And that's a big. They're at Collingwood, so that's a big commitment. Just that alone. So rugby's there. The little son, he's playing basketball as well, and our daughter's excelling at volleyball. And she's a hell of a basketball player as well. So they're all in the sports teams at school. So they are heavier than I ever was. I think like most kids today, they're programmed pretty deeply, but they're all doing well and learning that work ethic.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about the diversity of sport. For you and your wife, how important was that to try a number of different things and have exposure to multi sport and activities? You mentioned piano as well.
Sure, I've got to give my wife full credit for that, for pushing them further, I think, than I ever would in all these different directions to make sure they try everything. I was a little more like, "Geez, let's not overload them," and, she kept pushing them, and in a nice way, though, in a way that let's expose them and see where they end up. Let's let them try everything because, again, you don't know until you try. They can all ice skate and all these things. They're incredible snow skiers. Taught them to learn, at 3 years old. I wish I had learned at 3 instead of in my 20s, but, they're exceptional skiers, so, they're very well-rounded that way. My wife gets full credit for that push 100%.
So, what do you want them to get out of sports? You're the owner of a team. Maybe some people think, I want them to grow up to be professional athletes. What do you actually want all three of your children to get from youth sports?
Number 1, the work ethic has to be there, respect, integrity, treating people fairly, and moving on when a call doesn't go your way, not sulking, not bitching about it. It's about moving on. And all those things come through sports. I think you'll do very, very well as a person and a human being, whether you're in business, whether you're, whatever vocation you choose. If you learn a lot of these ups and downs through sports and keeping level, listening to your coach and knowing there's another side and an opponent, and being respectful. And I think if all of those things can come out of this, Scott, we've done our job.
How many of those did you get from sport? And where have you seen sports show up in your business endeavors and in your life in general?
I talk about that a lot. When you first of all, when you whatever sport you've played. So, back playing some stuff in school, as soon as you step onto that field and there's another opponent, a team, you're different, right? You feel different. If you don't feel it, maybe you shouldn't be there because you feel different. You want to win. These other people want to win that are on the other side of the team, and your juices start to flow, right? And there's a cool feeling about that. I think that professional athletes take with them as far as they can go. They live for that. So when we come into the business world, it's that same competitiveness. You're usually up against somebody or another company or something, and you've got to fight every day. So it's eerily similar how many lessons come from sports that roll right over into business. And I really believe if you're good in sports and competitive and care, and we always say, give a you know what, if you give a you know what, you're going to do well in all these areas, especially business. It overlaps almost seamlessly.
Well, and it's interesting as we talk about the two and the transferable skills that it would seem to me that both in the sporting environment and in the business environment, there come times when you have to make choices. You can cheat the game, you can cheat your opponents, or you can do things ethically. How much crossover have you found in those environments with those particular skills and those choices?
Scott, it's identical. You're going to meet people in sports that are doing things the wrong way, the constant complainers, the guys that are cutting corners and cheating, or the tennis and the guy calls it out when it's in. And, you just see those people. They're the same people in business. They're not people you really want to associate with or trust, frankly, but you got to find your way. So you can read a book about this, but until you're actually meeting these people and you got to get burned a few times, you always say you got to skin your knee a few times. And no matter what you're doing to learn some lessons. You hope you don't have to learn it too hard, but really you start to understand people and perhaps how you want to channel your life, who you want to surround yourself with, and move forward with, and avoid perhaps people that take different routes.
I'm really glad you brought that up, the skin your knee analogy there, because I am a big believer that part of the reason I want my kids in sports is so that they have a quote unquote safe environment to fail in. Like, yes, you can get hurt playing sports, but getting knocked down in sports and getting back up is such a great analogy for life. How much is that a part of your ethos as well with your own children?
It's 100% like that, whether it's sports, they're all working or have worked and will continue to work summers and learn people, learn work, like learn responsibility, but also make some mistakes to your point in safer environments, not on the streets, make these mistakes now, as a kid, what do they say? You touch the stove a couple times, you'll learn not to touch it again. You got to figure that stuff out, right? And that comes from exposing and not protecting too much, but allowing the leash to go out pretty far and see what happens.
How do you handle that as a coach as well? Because I think, especially when a lot of us as parents get into directing our children in those environments, there is this natural tendency to want to give them all the answers to the test and perhaps to overcoach. How has that process been for you?
The first year was probably more difficult because I didn't really, know it. Coaching, I didn't think that I'd be doing it, and I like to challenge myself. So when I took on the challenge, it was very, very new to me and fun, and also then different because it was, one of my boys was in there. So it was very different to try and separate yourself from dad to coach, and it's a hard thing to do, and it took me a good year to figure that out, that everyone's gotta be the same, and frankly, that sometimes means you've gotta talk to your son the same way that he's sort of a stranger kid that you know but you don't know, as a player, and separating that for me was a little bit difficult, but good to learn, and I'm much better at it now. Now I just send him off the field. I'm joking, but no, it's different.
No,
It's,
I agree with you. I coach one of my daughters right now, and my youngest wants me to help coach her next year. I've done it in conjunction with other parents so that there is that buffer at times where maybe you don't have to coach your own kids. We're talking about football with your son that you're coaching as well. How much of assistance helped in that respect?
some assistance there, certainly came from some friends that I know that are coaching as well. But really, patience is something that coaching has taught me. Like I'm pretty patient in business, but aggressive. But when you're coaching, it's a wonderful environment, I think, to learn a lot about yourself as well and how you react to situations, as a grown up, managing kids and sports and their emotions and the other team's emotions and calls, the same thing we just talked about, calls that go your way or the other way and how you're handling it because the kids are looking up to you and you've got to really set a high level, I think, of integrity. If that's the type of coach you want to be, like you, I don't know exactly your style, but I would understand that you're probably a pretty high level integrity guy. And I've seen the other types on the other field, and to not get emotionally involved in those kinds of conversations, etc. It's hard because your emotions are up as well. But I think you set that standard for your team and your kids and your program, much like you would do in a business, your family. You keep that levelness, and I believe that resonates with children.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I think as we coach, as we parent, we learn year by year. And there are things you did last year, maybe you wouldn't do this year as well. How have you seen yourself evolve as a coach, not just with respect to coaching your own son, but all of the children that you're overseeing?
It's good, and it's always a bit of a challenge because the ages that, it's kinda like 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, kind of in there, and, the first, when they were younger, a fire truck goes by and everyone's turning around looking at it. I'm trying to draw up a play and, it's like, "Okay, guys, focus, focus." There's some of that you go through stages as they get a little bit older and then they start to, as the saying is, put their stick on the ice a little bit more and they start to care a little bit more, and also, I think it's good if, the kids have a buddy or 2 on there. At first, I thought that's not good because all they do is talk, but it's actually better because they wanna get there, they wanna show up, they wanna see their friend. Frankly, some of them wanna compete and do better than their friends as well, and I think it turns on a little more competitive juices there, but it's also more warming, and then, have a bunch of strangers because I really believe there's another good aspect to having no friends. You're gonna make friends, and in life, that's one of the biggest lessons you can learn is walking into a room and not knowing anybody and breaking through those fears of saying, "Hi, my name is," and all that. Most people don't like doing that. It's just human nature. I think in sports, when you're in an environment, with a bunch of unknowns to you, you're gonna strengthen up as a human being going into that environment.
Well, and I think the other part of that, Amar, is that when you're on a team of, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 people, whether you're the BC Lions or whether you're U13 football players, there are going to be players on that team that you don't hang out with after practice. You don't hang out with after the game. But when you get to the game, when you get to the practice, you're all working toward the same goal. I think it's such an important teaching for life and for business. I imagine you've encountered the same.
That's a heck of a point you just brought up because the championship teams or the teams that win, they work together when they are together. To your point, it doesn't have to be after work or going for a beer with a guy, in the office and all that. But when you show up on the field or on the business front, you're united. You're after that one pursuit, that goal. You all do things the right way, with the right ethics. And when you get that harmony going, I think sometimes a team can be unstoppable on the field or off, meaning business, family, whatever it is, if you're on the same page, rowing those oars together. It really is a beautiful thing when you can have that harmony.
So one of the challenges that coaches, whether they're coaching their own kids or not, have in today's youth sports environment is what all of us are, and that's parents. How has that relationship been for you over the years that you've been coaching?
It's been good. There's been some long drives home for sure where, call didn't go that way and, we just let things go. And of course, we're in, development leagues, which is, you want to teach kids all about that integrity. And, sometimes it's, Dad, why didn't you, do this? And I knew that call. You knew the call was wrong, Dad. You know, that's, part of those lessons we talked about a few minutes ago where it resonates and having that car time together after things don't go your way and have that kind of extra coaching to your son or daughter, whatever it is, it's very important is that message galvanizes together with father and son or father and daughter or mother and daughter, mother and son. Those are private times to be able to debrief with your own to talk about those things. And sometimes it can be difficult, but again, I try to keep level. But it's very important. But they're very intense moments that come off the field, and I think those are good moments.
Yeah, I think they are as well if they're done in the order that you just laid out. Because what you just provided as an example was your son saying to you, Dad, why didn't you? That's initiated by the child. Where the problem in the car ride or on the sideline comes is when it's the parent initiating the conversation that they're going to try to coach their kid immediately after the game. They're going to tell them the things that they saw that could be better. Was that something you had to learn, or has that always been your approach?
I would say my approach is pretty level, but this was different. I definitely had to learn this on the go, and but learned pretty quickly. The key thing is you really just have to listen a lot before you talk. And I've always been a listener growing up, and I think that listening to your children is the best before you bark at them or try to push them in a certain way. And I'm not going to be on this podcast teaching people how to parent. That's for sure. Everyone's got their own business, but really, I think listening to your child before you react, no matter what that scenario is let them say what's on their mind. They're developing, they're young, and we're the ones that have to, sometimes it's challenging, but you have to be, I think, as level as possible to understand what they're going through and growing up with. We've got a lot figured out now because we've been through this ride. They're just starting that ride.
So the other relationship that has to be managed is the one with the parents. That's the other relationship the coach has to manage. You got all the kids to take care of, but then you've got to talk to the other stakeholders involved here who all have opinions. How do you get that relationship off on a good foot? And have you encountered any challenges with it?
It's been pretty good. Thank goodness our teams have been pretty good, so they've been winning. So it had too much grief on the sidelines. But you know, there is that there. You can see when you walk around and, you try not to notice too much and look over there, but you can tell. I think the classic one you've probably been through too is, "Why isn't my kid playing?" or "Why isn't my kid in?" And I try to rotate everybody, good, bad, or indifferent. I think that's proper sportsmanship in development leagues, like whether it's flag or tackle football. You rotate them all in, and not just to go out and massacre teams with your top 5 and leave the other 5 standing around. That's demoralizing to those 5 kids standing there looking at the grass. That's not cool, and I don't do that. And I've seen other coaches do that, and it might make themselves happy. It might make those 5 parents that are starters happy, but what about those other 5? I think about the whole team and what we're trying to do to develop youth athletes and young people into good skill sets. That means getting them on the field and getting them some encouragement behind them, getting them some self-esteem. All of those things come from playing, not from watching. So I think one of the things I've learned is yeah, listen to the parents a bit, but I'm going to rotate everybody in, which I think makes some people happy as parents and others not happy, saying, my kid's the best quarterback. He should be starting the whole game. Technically, yes, but this isn't the NFL.
And what are we really trying to do here at the end of the day? As you said, this is a developmental phase for children who are growing into young adults, hopefully at some point, that have confidence, that have that self worth that you talked about earlier. And if we don't build that early, and if we aren't explicit about what we're trying to do, that's never going to come from them. Do you have a meeting with parents at the start of the year and say, hey, here's what we're trying to do with your children? If we win, that's great. We're going to try to do that. But ultimately, our goal is X.
Our league president does that conversation. So at the coach level, we don't have to do that. But I say it enough around the players that I know it's going to get up to the parents. Like I'm very vocal about, hey, everybody's going to play today, so don't worry, you're going to get your shot. We rotate here, and that's it. Whether we're up 50 to nothing or down 50 to nothing, we're going to rotate, and that's just how we're going to do things. So I think that resonates, and we try to let the league leaders come over and have those conversations with parents as well. Just remember, this is about youth development, and it's not really about the points on the board. It's about all these other things in developing a young athlete into a young person, whether it's a daughter or a son, just being into a good person and playing things right and having fun. For Christ's sakes, they're kids. They gotta have some fun.
I'm with you completely. If that's not at the top of the list for everybody involved, we're missing it because that's what the kids want. That's why they're there primarily. There's other reasons that they want to play sports, but that's always at the top of the list, and we have to keep that in mind. I know your kids play a lot of different sports, but we're talking with respect to coaching about football. You own the BC Lions. You love football. I get it. You and I both know that there are a lot of parents out there that don't want their kids to have anything to do with football. Why, for you, was that a choice that you wanted to make for your children and introduce them to a sport that many people shy away from?
Yeah, football definitely is a different planet, when you get into that tackle area for sure. But, when you really look at the statistics, and we're not going to pull a bunch out today, but really it's not, the fear is so much more, I think, than the reality of what happens. It gets sensationalized. The team sport of football, to me, that locker room, that camaraderie, there isn't another sport that galvanizes it better to me than football being looking after the guy next to you. It is to me, the ultimate sport as far as all those things when it comes to respecting each other. And obviously, there's hitting. Rugby's the same thing. Rugby's very, very physical. And my boys play rugby, and I'm at these games. I see guys going off, and it scares me because they are whacking their heads into heads, and there's no protection at all. But I love the sport of rugby as well, and I played it. And, so I understand that. But contact sports, hockey, stuff's gonna happen, but we don't shy away from that. We don't shy away from things in life. We wanna get in and compete. We certainly don't like to see injuries happen in any sport, but frankly, it's gonna be reality forever. You can't or there'll be no physical contact in this world, and that's just part of sports, and it's part of, whether it's rugby, football, or hockey. It's contact, it's full on, and it's also part of the game that, I think excites people on both sides of the field as well. It takes a special person to go into that. It starts to distill out as the kids get older, whether they're into it or not. But your point about parents disallowing them into it, I say you gotta give the kids an opportunity and see if they like it, because I think that's starting to keep the bird in the nest too much, in my view.
Well, and I also think that whether we're talking about football, rugby, hockey, those three that you mentioned that are either contact or collision sports, depending on how you want to describe them, there is a greater responsibility on the coach to teach that aspect properly because none of us want to see injury. And certainly, tackling is taught a lot differently now than it was when I was playing football, however many decades ago. And that is a very good thing. And I think it's part of the information that needs to get out there.
So watching, a lot of the professionals, the gentleman that coaches the tackle team for my eldest son, he, is an ex-Calgary Stampeder, big guy. I'll tell you, the first practice I went to, I mean, they're probably running 4 plays in an hour and a half. It is all about education, tackling, wrapping up, light drills. It's more drills than anything, and then they run the odd play, and it's really about protecting, protecting, protecting. I was so very impressed with where this has gone as far as the teaching and training part of the physicality of the game, that, it's not just, I think parents look at a CFL game, an NFL game, and see the barbaric side of it and think, "Oh, my kid's going in." It's not like that at all. You know, there's going to be your odd kid though that's a little bit more of an animal than the other. That's going to just has his foot shaking. I always say is that scene in Wedding Crashers where Bradley Cooper's going crazy right at the guy's house. But there's the odd guy that's going to be that person that likes to hit people a little too much. But that's where the coach has got to step in and try and manage that.
No, you're absolutely right about that. And I think the part of the sport that you painted a picture of a little bit earlier does deserve a little more conversation. And listen, I'm not going to tell any parent they have to put their child in football. Absolutely not. It's a family decision and it's not right for everybody. However, I will say this about football, and I think rugby falls into this category as well. It is one of the very few sports that places value on every single body type that you can find out there. And that's tough to find in sports. There are so many great sports, and I love them all. But one of the unique things about football and rugby to a certain extent is that there is a place for everybody, and you are valued for physical characteristics that, quite frankly, in other sports get you excluded.
That's a great point, Scott. Look, you've got your quarterback, and we won't run through it all, but right to the O lineman, to the DBs, there is a spot for everybody. Well said. And there's a spot and a home for everybody. And it's very cool that way. It is all shapes and sizes, all speeds, strength, also mental, being, I would say, mentally strong and also mentally sharp, running plays, creating plays, you know, making something out of nothing when a play breaks down. There's all these different things that go into football specifically that take a lot, but everybody can play the game no matter what, situation you are. My little guy was a little smaller a few years ago when he got started on flag, and the coach asked him, and I wasn't coaching him, but the coach asked him, he said, "Are you fast?" And my little guy goes, "Yes." "Are you scared of getting hit?" My little guy goes, "Yes." He goes, "Okay, you're a wide receiver." So, it's stuff like that. It's just, finding out who's going to do what. And, sometimes those simple questions answer that, but there's a spot for everybody.
I'm glad you bring up flag because it is such a great entry point to the sport. Whether people continue on to play the tackle aspect of the game, whether they continue on with flag or simply transfer those skills over, the sport's popularity has been exploding. We're going to see it in the Olympics in a couple of years down in LA. Was that the initiation point for your family as well?
It was, and seeing that, and also us getting involved, with the Lions certainly helped supercharge that. We've really tried to invest in the province here in all sorts of different sports leagues, investing in flags, tents, coaching seminars. We've helped the Indigenous. We have a tournament now out at Abbotsford, which is wonderful. Introducing the game, it's everywhere and growing. That flag aspect is so good that, hey, if you want to step into the tackle world, that's great, but when you start kids, even when they're 5 or 6 playing, flag football, it's like a big game of tag, right? And it's super fun, and everyone's just having a blast. It's fun to watch too as a parent. And then let's see how far they go. But watching this now become an Olympic sport, being flag, incredible. I think Canada's gonna do well. Like Nathan's gonna be heading over there for us, which is gonna be fantastic. You hate losing him here, but go to the Olympics, of course you gotta go. That's just awesome, and I think it's gonna be a fantastic thing to get the game on more of a world stage for sure. But here in BC, in the Lower Mainland and different areas now, it's exploded. We need more coaches is what we need.
Yeah, and it's hard to get them. And part of the reason it's hard to get them, Amar, is that people don't wanna deal with the time commitment and then some of the external factors that I mentioned earlier, and one of those is parents, and that's part of the reason I started this podcast is that I wanted to help educate parents, and I wanted to bring different perspectives on as to how they can better create a positive youth sports environment. What advice do you give to parents? And I imagine it may have changed now that you've been a coach and you've seen this through a couple of different angles.
I always just say, let them have an opportunity, let them come in, or parents, please come and watch, some of these flag or tackle practices. Come to a practice, come to a game, and actually come see what we're doing, not have a judgment on, geez, it's barbaric, and, I'm worried about concussions and my kid getting whacked, and, there's all these notions of this stuff that the worst is gonna happen. Instead of coming out and seeing what a beautiful game it is and how it's coached and how much fun it is for the kids to run around and look after each other and throw the ball, and the defensive and offensive side in football, there's nothing like it. It's very cool, different sets of people, the whole thing, and then rotating them and seeing what they like, and if they don't like it, that's fine, but please don't, in my view, to any parent that's listening to this, don't disqualify them from an opportunity to find something they may absolutely love, in life, no matter what sport it is, including football.
Now that you've been a coach, how do you believe you have improved as a parent supporting other coaches who are overseeing your own kids?
I would definitely say that, having even more, I'm a pretty patient person, but having more patience, understanding, thinking things through a little bit, giving kids the opportunity. I learned that, very early on that I want to rotate all the kids, and there's kids coming up to me pretty upset that they probably should be starting or should be in longer, but you have to manage that. So I've learned how to manage that, which is hard. How do you sit a kid that's playing awesome? Because the other kid has needs to have an opportunity to, and that's called fairness. And I think that's one of those things that children have to learn in life, that fairness has to come, and you have to push fairness in life. And not everything is fair in life either. It teaches you a lot about what's fair and isn't fair. And life's got a whole bunch of, lessons that are similar to that as you go through it. So it's sort of get used to it. Not everything's going to go your way when you want it. And that's good. And it also teaches kids, I think, to be a little bit more, I would say, empathetic towards other kids that maybe don't have the same athletic natural abilities that the other kid does, but give them some time, give him or her some time to develop that. They can't develop it on the sideline. So, and those are hard conversations. Certainly helped me learn a lot about that. Then I can take those lessons home, even with my 3 kids, and also apply some of those rules in different ways, right? But the same thought pattern of fairness and what's fair and what isn't. It all starts to really galvanize at home as well.
Well, and it becomes a nuanced conversation the more that children progress and the higher the age gets as well, because I think most people out there can agree on equal play to a certain point. And then the environment starts to get a little more competitive. And some of the other lessons that we're trying to teach through sports are, look, you're going to get what you earn as well in this life. So, where is that age for you? Where's that delineation between, look, everybody needs to play, everybody needs to develop, and then, all right, you might not play as much as the next person because you haven't earned that through the work you put in.
That's exactly right, and that's a life lesson, and it's hard when kids are younger to, understand that fully because their emotion, their brains are developing, they're passionate, they wanna go in, but fair play is one of the most important things I think as coaches we can deliver. And of course, look, to your point, you get more competitive and higher level, fair play starts to fall away and it is messed up, but that's life too. That goes into the classroom, college, business, wherever you want to end up. You got to work at it to get to that upper echelon. If you want anything in this life, you got to put the time in and the work in.
So, one of the things that I think allows football to be an easy access point, whether we're talking about flag or the contact variety, is that it's quite affordable relative to many sports that are out there. That being said, Amar, the youth sports environment has gotten infinitely more expensive than when you and I were growing up, and it is very challenging for families. I know that you happen to be in a privileged position where your children could play whatever they want, no matter the cost, because of the resources you happen to have. But as a parent and as a steward of sport, how concerned are you about accessibility?
This is something that, it's very difficult, I think, for a lot of families. And we see some kids on some of our kids' teams that are not on the school teams, but on the outside leagues struggling. And one of the hardest things for us to do too is try to help them without embarrassing them in any way, saying this person doesn't even have a proper bag to bring their gear, but you also don't want to single them out and say, here's a free bag, because you don't want to, demoralize somebody that just doesn't have enough dollars to allocate to these sports. And to your point, the cost is astronomical. There are ways, where there's a will, there's a way and all that to get used equipment and do these kinds of things. And I think the most important thing we can do as sports owners is invest in these leagues such that directly that money does filter down to help anybody that needs it that wants to get into sport, because it is a real challenge. And I don't think there's a silver bullet or a magic answer to it. But what we've tried to do as custodians of the Lions is really invest in the community and say, wherever we can do, whatever we can do to help, whether it's with the equipment or whatever it is, we're going to make those investments to help the under unfortunate, I should say, that just you don't have enough that would love to come in but simply can't afford it. We want to make that happen for as many youth as possible, Scott. And if we can do that, I think we're doing our job.
Just as a Canadian citizen, how concerned are you about affordability in today's environment? And again, I think football is quite far down the list because the equipment needs are pretty low. They're generally rentals. Nobody's buying shoulder pads and helmets every single year. That's something that you're paying a user fee for. But there are a lot of other sports, and hockey is probably at the top of the list in this country. I know that it is the most expensive sport that is widely played in this country. Where's your level of concern with affordability?
Yeah, I think it gets worse. I don't think it gets better, and it's gonna be the haves and have-nots. I hate to say it, that's really where it's gonna go. If you can't buy the skates and the sticks and the bags and the this and the that and afford the travel, I mean, just the travel alone. A lot of these kids are moving around a lot at a young age. Those are expensive trips, the hotels, you know what hotels cost today, everything's inflated, and I think it's gonna continue to be a challenge. I think that's too bad because a sport like football, to your point, very low entry costs. A lot of the stuff's reusable, the helmets and all these things get passed down and passed down as kids grow. And the other sports, you have to start fresh a lot with fresh equipment just to keep up with the Joneses kind of thing too. You don't want to show up and not have the cool skates. And there's all that pressure and all that stuff. Sadly, I just think we're stuck in that reality where some of those sports have become elite. Elite costs come with that, and that's just the avenue that, we sit in certain regions today in our country.
No, I agree with you completely. And affordability, when Jumpstart published its latest State of Youth Sports 2025, affordability was a concern for a third of Canadians, and 25% feel overwhelmed with the logistics that come along with sport as well. Those are pretty striking numbers for families across this country. And it tells you that what we're going to do is exclude. And so we're not going to get best of best, which is what I think you and I always believed sport was growing up. It was a merit-based system that, hey, whoever was the best player was going to continue to proceed. We're not going to get there. We're going to get the best of those who can afford it. And I think for certain sports in this country, it is going to diminish participation rates. Do you agree with that?
100%. Sadly, 100%. That's the world we're in. It's not going back to when you and I grew up, where it was merit-based, and everyone was pretty equal going into this, whether you were a have or have not, in the finance department with your family. It didn't matter. It was really, geez, that person, there's the outliers. It didn't matter what background they came from or whether it's a big house or a small house you lived in. It didn't matter. Today, all of that matters just to get into the game. You have to spend a lot of investment, as we just talked about, that it does separate. And to your point, let's hope. But I think the reality is, it doesn't diminish or help extinguish people's dreams and desires because of the ante to get into the game.
Yeah, I certainly hope so, and I don't have the answer, and you probably don't have the answer here today, but with someone who's so accomplished in business, I feel compelled to ask you if you see pathways back to community sport. The BC Lions are a particular community-oriented organization, so I know you understand the value of community. To me, getting sports more affiliated with schools again, getting more community-based sports is part of the answer, if not the entire answer. Do you have any thought as to how we shift from what has become a very private and professionalized youth sports environment into a more of a community-based one?
I think it's a challenge. I think we're not going to quit trying, though. We visit 200 schools a year as the BC Lions, speaking to students, and also things about racism and treating women right and doing all those good things. And so we're doing a lot of that groundwork, but also introducing sports to the kids and having some role models go around to the schools. And the kids sometimes will listen to dad and mom, but when an athlete comes in, you can hear a pin drop. They're going to listen to every word. They're going to pay attention. They're not gonna be looking at their phones every 5 minutes and all that stuff. They're gonna care, and some of those lessons, I hope, come in, but solving the financial aspect is a different animal, and I think because of the it's a good and bad thing, right, Scott? Like, look, sports has become so big and these leagues have become so big, these people are making so much money that the kids look at their TikToks and they look at their Instagrams and people only post the good stuff of what they wanna post, right? It's not a real life thing. You're seeing a lifestyle of extravagance, and they look up to this and the rap videos, and it's all excess, and the kids feel like that's success, where I've got a different view of success. That's who you are as a person, how hard you work, how you treat others, all of those things, not really, I think making money is wonderful, but, if that's your starting driver, that's gonna be difficult in sports for a lot of people that don't have that head start. And then, of course, there's a lot of people that have that head start that get spoiled with it because they've got everything kinda handed to them, and they don't really earn it. And there's this kind of imbalance of desire, and then there's sometimes too much padding, I think, too. This is a tough one, Scott. We need about a few more hours to solve this.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right about that. But I do think it takes community oriented people like myself, like yourself, and the legions of parents who are out there who see this and they know it's not right. And they have to realize that they can make a difference, and I hope that we can mobilize enough people that we can, create a type of shift because there's enough people in this country that want to do that. It sounds to me like you've stayed very grounded in your values despite the financial success that you've had. Where did those values come from?
100% from my mom and dad. We worked at a young age, delivered papers, did all those things, learned the value of a dollar. My parents, were starting to make some good money, back when we were growing up, but it wasn't shared like that, and there was no excess for us. It was, we didn't live poor, so to speak, but certainly there was no excesses. It was, you got new shoes when yours wore out, that kind of stuff, right? And those are good lessons to have. Not you're not getting the cool shoes because they're cool. It's you have shoes and you're lucky that we bought you shoes kind of thing. And, when you're working and you want to spend your money on shoes, go for it. But just those little types of things that I think have kept me grounded to today, where, we're very careful with things, but also at the same time, we understand there's no money tree in the backyard. You have to earn everything. And we're fortunate that our family emigrated here over 100 something years ago to BC for better opportunity. Well, Canada's been very good to us. We want to be very good back to Canada and teach our children those same values that got us to where we are today and how we invest in things. And that is really working at that opportunity, respecting it. And we want our kids to be the same as well and not be handed things in that type of environment. You got to work for them.
Well, I think one of the challenges with that, as you mentioned a couple of minutes ago, is the social media aspect of it and the short form video aspect of it, where people are posting their highlights and there is this delusion that that is real life and that that's what children aspire to. I am not trying to say that social media is the devil, but I do think that there is a lot more downside than upside with the bulk of it. How do you navigate that challenge as a parent right now?
Yeah, we're in the thick of it. The kids are my eldest just turned 16 today. So 16, 14, and 12. They're right in that zone where all the kids are, just going like this, and it's not good for the brain either. The problem is putting the toothpaste back in the tube here isn't going to happen. They're going to be on TikTok, and if it's not on your kid's phone, they're going to watch the other kid's phone, and it's out there. But I think the challenge is for us, and what we've tried to do is just limit the amount of screen time, manage what we can manage, not worry about them being at someone else's house and looking at more screens, but managing that time, managing the content, and also talking to them a lot about what's real and what isn't, and or sitting down and saying, "Let's watch a movie together as a family. Let's watch a sport event as a family. Put these away. These phones are not welcome, and they're never welcome at our dinner table or anywhere near it. At night, they're put away, and the iPads." And you do the best you can to manage it and hope that, they don't get too deeply involved with their brain and thinking that's real life because it's a production. Like anything else, everyone's just kind of producing for entertainment value, or there's egomaniacs on there, or there's a lot of different stuff. But I really think that you can manage that at home, and then the rest is going to be a bit of luck as well, Scott.
Well, and I think part of this comes back to the coaching, Amar, because coaches have a responsibility to disseminate some of this information to their players as they're entering this really influential period in their life where they're exposed to some of this stuff. And you and I both know this has crept into the youth sports environment. Highlights being posted with 10-year-olds and being tracked for how many goals they scored or how many touchdowns they threw for in a particular game. Do you address that at all with the kids that you're overseeing?
We don't really talk too much when I'm coaching about those things. I think that's more of a parent-child conversation. But if there's a parent, because there is some upsides to the positivity of look, if your kid's a star quarterback or volleyball player, you're producing certain things that now, if you don't produce them, you're not going to get looked at by a college. They want film, they want feed, they want content, and that's gone right into, the environment of youth sports everywhere. Whereas if you don't really have a profile, you may not even get looked at. And it's so embedded now, but managing it in the right way of saying, let's build your film, but let's not, post the lasagna you ate last night. Like no one cares about that. And I think it's gotten a little bit too far. But I think there's a balance there. If there's a strategy and it's managed with the parent, with the youth athlete, that it can work. but you really have to watch it close because this is a, it's a very different environment from what we grew up in, but also it can be a dangerous environment. It can put unneeded pressure on kids as well. Everything's filmed, and I feel really, blessed that we didn't have this stuff when we grew up. We just ran around and biked and did a lot more fun instead of having a TV in our hand.
Well, and it's interesting that you say that you might not get seen. I kind of feel differently about it, quite frankly. I feel like there's so much film out there and there's so many streaming services where you can see games that if a child is going to ascend to a Div 1 school or a scholarship at a Canadian university or a professional opportunity at some point, I feel like they're not gonna get missed. I feel like we live in an environment now where they're not gonna get missed, and so parents, I think, need to back off, especially the ones that are trying to post about their 10, 11, 12-year-old kids doing X, Y, and Z. If players are getting drafted to the NFL at a UBC, which is my alma mater, I don't think anybody's gonna get missed in today's environment. That's just my personal opinion.
Well, that's good, and I hope that that is the case. I know that some US schools, the ante is seeing a whole bunch of film now that goes back to when you are 10 to see how you've developed, even if you're in that top caliber. But I agree, look, if you're an outlier, you're an outlier. A coach is gonna call someone. It'll evolve, but I also know that certain schools' prerequisites now is to have a whole bunch of feed before they'll even interview you, which is yeah, I look, trust me, I'm with you on, disliking that, and hoping that that doesn't become the norm, Scott.
Well, and it's interesting because I do think there are a lot of coaches out there who have said to me, "I don't care what a kid's highlight tape looks like. I wanna see him or her play an entire game." And that's, I think, the part that parents miss because you know from coaching that any particular player can look amazing on one play. Have them play an entire game. Do they work during the entire game? Do they slack off at the other times? When they're not catching the ball, do they actually block? These are all things that coaches who are reputable actually wanna see.
That's a heck of a point, right? The highlight reel is what you create. It is not in any way, shape, or form a 360 of that athlete and their abilities and their habits and their ethic and anything else. You're just showing what you wanna show, and to me, that's, it's kinda like a resume, right? We always say in the old days, paper doesn't refuse ink, so your resume can have anything you want on it. Someone's got to get out there and work, and you got to judge that work once they start. But same thing here, right? You're showing what you want to show, and you're not showing, probably that you got fired 9 times. You're showing that you got hired 9 times, and you're not talking about probably the way you left those those jobs or whatever. And the same thing with this. That's a great point. That really you're gonna get called out eventually if you're riding on luck and just riding on cool videos and shorts that are created to get somebody's attention, but you gotta have a 360.
You obviously have seen youth sports from a bunch of different through a bunch of different lenses over the last number of years. You and I are big believers in sports, so I certainly don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. But what do you see as the biggest issue in youth sports today, Amar?
I think the one thing is the attention of eyeballs watching sports, concern that because everyone's going to these phones and these shorts that the TV and the cable and all this stuff, it's different to get people to sit for hours to watch things. I don't think that's a challenge to youth sports, but once they get out of that, are they gonna be engaged sitting around watching, games, hockey games? Take kids to hockey games, they sit on their phones. So I think one of the biggest challenges youth sports has are these things sitting around in their bags and them just jumping to look for quick entertainment instead of talking to their teammates in the locker room in between games. They're on their phones, they're checking their feeds. They're not, doing as much social activity. I think that would be the one thing I would say would be the biggest challenge is not interacting with each other enough. And one thing my wife does with my daughter's volleyball, she calls socials to just get everyone together, no phones, and they'll do puzzles, they'll do something together, or they'll make something, they'll bake, and it's a team environment with no distractions, just them getting to know each other. I think we need more of that in youth sports. Otherwise, the almighty phone and media it's not their fault, it's their environment. But we need to remove that and get them focused on each other, and the sport.
You're absolutely right. And the number of professionals that have come on this podcast and said to me, one of the things that's missing with today's highly skilled athlete is game IQ because they are not watching full games anymore and they're only seeing highlight reels, it lags behind. That we've never seen kids who could catch or throw as well as they do right now, but they might not understand the game as well because they're not seeing it within that context. You bring up a great point, and it's something that has been harped on to me. But I love your suggestion of, hey, why don't we get the team together? Everybody leaves their phone at the door and we watch this game together and interact in that environment.
I think it's critically important that we try to, introduce that wherever we can, and I think it does nothing but help the development of camaraderie. Again, not looking at shorts all the time and checking your messages. It gets their brain, I would say disconnected or offline for a while, and then into an environment where, it's getting to know each other, as a team, getting to know your coach, getting to know your environment, and really, frankly, I think it's the F word, it's focus.
We talked earlier and you used the term hands on owner, which I wholeheartedly agree with. You're in a position where you don't have to be. And there's a lot of owners of sports teams that are not. Why is it important to you?
Community. It's really about the community and having a face on the BC Lions where, I think here we have David Braley, a wonderful owner for 25 years, but he lived in Hamilton and it was hard for him to resonate or also acknowledge or get behind some of the programs here that, we're deeply involved in as a community just because we live here, we know people, and we're passionate. And of course, being involved with the team doesn't mean I'm picking the quarterback and the running back. I'm doing zero of that. We have great coaches in place. So no Jerry Jones nonsense here, as I would say, but certainly getting involved with the team as far as trying to build the brand out, get sports, top of mind, in BC and helping youth athletes wherever we can in this province. And we're not going to go away doing that. We're going to keep investing in the BC Lions and youth sports and whatever we can do to help. It's a wonderful place to be as an owner to be able to leverage that and do it in the right way and get more and more youth involved. That was our goal, is to get a new CFL fan base here and just kids interested in sports, whatever direction they go. But we'd love them to come out, watch the Lions, and see the Lions out in the community doing great things.
Well, and you're a perfect example of someone who can be involved in youth sport and end up working in sport again one day without becoming a professional athlete. And you've got a staff of I don't know how many people that probably fall into that category as well. And I imagine just from a life standpoint, whether we're talking about the BC Lions or your other businesses, do you look for people who have played sport and have had that upbringing as adding value through that to your companies?
I would say that, I'd be lying if I said we don't. I think some of our best performers have a sports background. One guy that has been with me for almost 30 years, he's an Ironman triathlete. His work ethic is second to none. He's probably worked out twice before I wake up, and I wake up pretty early. And there's ethic in some of those, characteristics, those habits certainly cross right over into business. And we do find that people that have started in youth sports, have had those disciplines we talked about earlier, have all those things and those ingredients. They carry those disciplines, and you're going to win. You're going to win in business. You're going to win in whatever you choose to play at once you get through school, whatever your vocation is, whatever your passion is. Bring that with you, and when you do, I can tell you that it's got definitely it's an edge advantage. We do look for that.
Very well said, Amar, as has this entire conversation been. I'm going to let you go. I know your time is tight, but thank you very much for spending time with me here, talking to other parents out there and trying to help them become better sports parents in the process.
Listen, thank you very much, Scott. You have a great podcast. I look forward to meeting you in person at some time in the near future. And thanks again for having me. Go Lions.
I hope you enjoyed this episode and you found some tangible takeaways that you can bring with you in your journey to becoming a better sports parent. The best way for you to support this podcast is for you to subscribe, follow, rate, review, and drop us a comment on whichever platform you're watching or listening. And the fastest way for us to grow this podcast and reach more parents out there is for you to share it with your respective networks and to tell people that you see at your youth sporting events when you're there with your children. Big thanks to Lightstock Music and Andre Diakonu for the music on this podcast, which is a production of Toolkit Content. Until next time, happy sports parenting. And remember, have fun out there. That's what it's supposed to be about.